Hi, thanks for tuning into this episode. We're going to be talking a little bit about the interaction of different qualities and how they influence the adaptation of other qualities, and how, as sports mastery improves, these specific interactions can change. To use and steal an example from super training, they look at whether or not absolute strength influences vertical jump height. And from a one-to-one connection, the answer is no. Absolute strength does not directly influence the vertical jump height. However, absolute strength affects how much strength and maximal force your leg extensors can produce. The maximum amount of force your leg extensors can produce influences the amount of force one can apply into the ground. The amount of force one can apply into the ground ultimately may affect the total impulse that can be accumulated in the movement. And as we know, impulse is directly related to vertical jump height. Thus, by looking at the chain of connections, one can readily see how absolute strength is interconnected with vertical jump height. Again, force is not the only quality involved in the impulse. There are other velocity-specific factors and speed of contraction factors that may influence the speed at which the force can be produced, but ultimately the magnitude of the force that can be expressed is limited by the absolute strength of those muscles acting during that movement. Thus, one can probably go even further and say that development of absolute strength helps facilitate the adaptation and performance of other qualities, because the larger the magnitude of force one can produce, the larger the possible impulse can be. As sports mastery increases, however, the specifics and the influences of maximal force may become limiting due to the fact that A, force cannot continually be improved, B, force is relative to body weight, C, the process of developing force may hinder other specific qualities that affect the impulse, and D, the total energy required to further increase force may hinder the training process of the athlete. That's kind of where the whole idea of enough strength comes into play. It's whether or not that strength base is large enough to facilitate other specific adaptations. An example they use in super training to highlight this facilitatory process is the use of jump exercises to improve sprint performance. They're shown that squatting does not directly correlate to faster sprint speeds. However, specific jumping exercises such as bounding are related to jump speeds. These bounding exercises are also related to squat strength, which is why one can see that improving squat strength will help the facilitation of bounding and therefore the facilitation of top speed. Again, only to an extent, because the maximal squat strength is predicated on magnitude. So only enough squat strength needs to be developed to the point where one can perform bounding exercises proficiently. Then improving those bounding exercises might have better facilitatory effects on sprint speed. So if one were to just solely focus on the squat strength, you'll continuously improve the magnitude you could possibly produce, but you will not be necessarily directly influencing sprint speed. It's critical to understand how these motor qualities relate to one another, because as you increase sports mastery, trying to simply improve squatting strength to improve your sprint speed will not work. It's because the connections become less and less specific, and the specific training that needs to occur in regards to sprint training needs to more closely represent the actual motor qualities of sprinting itself. This is why general strength training is typically used with lesser trained athletes, and special strength training means are used with more advanced athletes. The special strength training means typically embody motor qualities that are more specific to that movement, where the connection is much more direct. But again, it's important to remember that those facilitatory qualities need to be developed prior to the introduction of any special strength training means. Again, this is not my original thought. This comes from Super Training. I believe it's page 117. It's an interesting discussion, and I think it's an important one to have, because as we further define those specific qualities that embody specific movements, we can better train athletes and get more specific adaptations and essentially more bang for our buck. Thank you for listening, and much appreciated.